Amara had never imagined that her life would come to this. A small, dimly lit room, the walls damp and cold, the air heavy with the scent of neglect. At 25 she should have been free to walk under the sun, to let her fingers dance over paper with thoughts, ideas and dreams, yet here she was, her hands bound by heavy iron chains that clinked ominously whenever she moved. The chains were thick and unyielding, cruelly designed to remind her of the power her stepfamily held over her. They had not even bothered to disguise their intentions. They wanted her silent, restrained, incapable of leaving a mark, either on paper or in the world. Every link dug into her wrists, leaving red, angry impressions that ached constantly, a physical echo of the oppression she endured. Her stepfamily, with their sharp eyes and cold hearts, thrived on fear. They would walk past her chained form with casual cruelty, whispering insults, laughing when she winced at a careless movement. They controlled her every moment, measuring her words, her expressions and even the beats of her breath. Yet in the midst of their tyranny, Amara's spirit remained unbroken. She had learned to sit in silence, observing, calculating and learning everything around her. The chains could hold her hands, but they could not contain the fire that burned in her mind. Every whispered threat, every cruel glance, only fueled her determination to survive and to find a way to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. Her mind became her greatest ally, mapping out the room, memorizing the routines of her captors and cataloging every opportunity she might exploit to her advantage. She noticed the cracks in the walls where the wind would seep in and listened to the murmurs of villagers outside her window. Though no one dared speak to her, she could hear their hushed conversations, the rumors about her stepfamily's cruelty, and the pity they masked with caution. They were afraid to act, fearing the wrath of those who held the chains that bound her. Yet even in their silence, Amara found subtle hope. She imagined them as threads in a tapestry, distant observers who might one day play a role in her liberation. The physical toll was relentless. Her wrists throbbed from the unyielding metal, her fingers stiffened and swelled from the lack of movement, and her back ached from sitting for hours in the cramped space. The chains made the simplest of tasks unbearable. Even reaching for a cup of water became a trial of pain and endurance. Yet Amara endured quietly, refusing to let her stepfamily witness any display of weakness. She understood that power was often a matter of perception. If they saw fear, they would tighten their control. If they saw compliance, they would strip her of dignity and hope. So she wore her quiet defiance like armor, her eyes reflecting intelligence and an unwavering will that even the cruelest observer could not ignore. Every night, as darkness cloaked the village, Amara would allow her thoughts to wander beyond the chains. She imagined writing letters that could reveal truths her captors feared, envisioning a world where her words were free and her hands moved without restraint. She pictured herself walking among the villagers, their whispers now filled with awe instead of fear, and her stepfamily's faces etched with disbelief at the courage they had tried to suppress. In those moments, the chains seemed less like a prison and more like a challenge, a test of endurance and strategy, one she was determined to pass. Despite the cruelty surrounding her, despite the isolation and the pain, Amara remained unbowed, quietly plotting the day when the chains would fall, and her voice would finally be heard. Amara had long believed that her room, small and shadowed as it was, held no secrets, yet that evening, as the fading sun painted streaks of gold across the cracked walls, her eyes caught a subtle gleam in the far corner. A chest, small and unassuming, partially hidden beneath a moth-eaten blanket, seemed to pulse with silent significance. The wood was old, the iron hinges rusted, but it carried an air of mystery that drew her forward despite the chains that bound her hands. Each movement caused the chains to clink softly, a grim reminder of the captivity she endured, yet her curiosity overpowered the pain. She leaned as close as she could, feeling the rough texture of the chest beneath her fingertips, tracing the worn carvings, imagining the lives it had silently observed through years of neglect and secrecy. It was not just an object, it was a promise, a whisper from a past she barely remembered yet felt intimately connected to. With painstaking effort, Amara managed to tilt the chest enough to peer inside, revealing a carefully folded letter lying atop faded cloth. The envelope, yellowed and delicate with age, bore her name written in a familiar, flowing script, one that stirred memories she could not fully grasp but that resonated deep within her. The letter was from someone long gone, someone who had cared for her in ways her stepfamily never had. Her heart thumped as she imagined the hands that had penned it, the urgency and care that must have accompanied each stroke of ink. It was as if the letter had been waiting, patient, for her to discover it, and now the weight of its significance pressed upon her chest with both hope and fear. As she gingerly unfolded the paper, The words hinted at truths so profound and dangerous that they could shatter the carefully constructed lies of her oppressors. The letter spoke of her rightful inheritance, a heritage deliberately concealed by those who sought to control her. It hinted at crimes, whispers of deceit, and injustices that her stepfamily had perpetrated in the shadows, crimes they never intended anyone to uncover. Each line she read illuminated the darkness that had enveloped her life, exposing not just her family's cruelty but also the hidden power she possessed simply by knowing the truth. The chains that bound her hands felt heavier, yet paradoxically her mind grew lighter, more alert, more determined. Amara understood immediately that this letter was not merely a message, it was a weapon and a lifeline. It contained the knowledge that could unravel the lies and fear that had suffocated her existence. She began to plot, quietly, carefully, imagining ways to ensure that the contents of the letter would reach someone who could act, someone who could help bring justice. The room seemed to shrink around her with the weight of possibility, yet in that pressure, her resolve crystallized. Each thought, each strategy she formulated became sharper, more precise. Despite the chains, despite the constant presence of watchful eyes outside her door, Amara felt the stirrings of a power that no lock, no chain, no cruel heart could ever suppress. The hidden chest, the letter within it, had given her more than hope, it had given her purpose, and she would cling to that purpose with every ounce of cunning and courage she possessed. The stepfamily had begun to notice subtle changes in Amara, though they could not yet pinpoint the source. She had always been quiet, compliant in appearance, but now there was a spark in her eyes that betrayed the quiet storm brewing within her. Every glance she cast in the presence of her oppressors seemed laden with meaning, as if she knew something they feared, something that could unravel the carefully maintained illusion of control. Their paranoia grew by the day. They watched her with sharper eyes, whispered among themselves about her strange behavior, and interpreted the slightest hesitation or careful movement as a sign of rebellion. They believed that controlling her physically, chaining her hands, restricting her movements, and monitoring her every word would prevent any truth from emerging. What they failed to understand was that Amara's mind, sharp and alert, was no longer shackled. The chains could restrain her body, but they could not restrain the thoughts racing in her mind, the strategy she was weaving in secret. Their cruelty took on new forms. They would taunt her mercilessly, sneering at her attempts to speak, and they invented punishments that tested both her endurance and her spirit. At night, they murmured ominous warnings of curses and consequences, invoking superstitions designed to terrify her. Amara had heard these threats countless times, yet they only reinforced her determination. She realized that fear was a tool, one they had wielded against her for years, but it could now be twisted into fuel for her own survival. The more they tried to dominate her, the more careful and precise she became in her planning. She learned to read the tension in their voices, the micro-expressions of their faces, and to predict the moves they might make, using their own fear and greed against them. Every cruel act, every whispered threat, sharpened her awareness and solidified the resolve that one day the tables would turn. In the quiet shadows of the household, Amara found an unlikely ally, a servant who had endured the same harsh environment yet possessed a loyalty and courage that few could muster. The servant, quiet and observant, understood the depth of Amara's suffering and the significance of her discovery. In hushed tones, when the oppressors were away, they communicated, exchanging subtle messages and observations. The servant guided Amara in the careful concealment of the letter, showing her hidden spaces within the room where it could remain safe from prying eyes. Together, they devised signals that could pass unnoticed to the outside world, small acts of communication that could carry hope beyond the chains that confined her. The servant's presence became a lifeline, a bridge between her and the freedom she imagined, and Amara drew courage from the knowledge that she was not entirely alone. With the servant's guidance, Amara attempted her first real act of rebellion. Using every ounce of cunning, she maneuvered the letter closer to the edges of her prison, aiming for a chance to pass it into hands that could act on its revelations. The night was thick with danger, the household steeped in shadows, and the slightest noise could betray her efforts. She moved carefully, counting each step, timing every gesture, the chains clinking softly yet deliberately as she shifted her position. Her heart raced, a wild drumbeat that echoed in her chest, mixing fear with adrenaline and hope. At one point, a creak in the floor above froze her in place. Every muscle tensed as the stepfamily's presence loomed nearby, yet through careful planning she avoided detection. The near miss left her trembling, but it also ignited an exhilarating sense of possibility. She had taken the first step, dared to act despite the chains, and in that act she felt the first whisper of her own power. Though failure seemed imminent, the courage it brought to her spirit was undeniable, marking the beginning of a journey from captivity to liberation. The letter, when Amara finally opened it in the quiet of her dim room, spoke with a voice that transcended time, a voice she felt deep in her bones. The inked words unfolded a story she had only sensed in fragments, confirming truths her stepfamily had tried desperately to bury. It told of her mother, a woman of fierce courage and wisdom, whose life had been cut short by the greed and cruelty of those who now held Amara captive. Within the delicate folds of the paper were hidden details of her rightful inheritance, lands and treasures stolen, and secrets that implicated her stepfamily in acts of deceit and betrayal that spanned years. Each sentence was a revelation, exposing not only the theft of wealth and status but the erasure of her identity, the deliberate attempt to reduce her to silence and obedience. Reading the letter, Amara felt the chains that bound her hands transform in her mind into symbols of the fear her oppressors carried. The fear of truth, the fear of exposure, the fear of justice she now possessed the knowledge to summon. She realized that the chains were never merely physical restraints. They were manifestations of the stepfamily's anxiety, the tangible representation of what they could not control, the knowledge she now held. Emboldened by the revelations, Amara began to test the limits of her captors, planting seeds of rebellion in subtle, calculated ways. She moved in patterns they could not predict, whispered messages with her eyes to the servant who aided her, and left tiny marks that only those attuned to her would recognize. These small acts, though seemingly insignificant, were profound declarations of her agency. She exploited the superstitions of her stepfamily, hinting at omens and unseen forces, watching with satisfaction as they flinched at shadows and murmurs they could not explain. In her careful manipulations, she communicated with the outside world, sending coded signs to villagers who had once feared to interfere. Slowly, imperceptibly, the balance of power began to shift, though no one yet realized it. The village, once paralyzed by fear, began to sense that something extraordinary was stirring behind the walls of the oppressive household, that even the chained woman might wield influence in ways invisible yet undeniable. Yet the path to liberation was perilous and treachery lurked close. One of Amara's helpers, either coerced by threats or overcome by fear, faltered in their loyalty. The betrayal came suddenly, like a knife to the heart of her carefully constructed plans. The stepfamily discovered part of her secret correspondence, and the punishment was immediate and merciless. Amara endured harsh reprimands, deprivation, and cruel psychological torment designed to break her spirit and reassert the chain's dominance. Pain and fear threatened to overwhelm her, yet in that crucible, her resolve hardened. She understood that betrayal and suffering were unavoidable aspects of her journey. Each act of cruelty, each moment of despair, became a lesson in vigilance, strategy, and endurance. The danger she faced reminded her that freedom required more than hope. It demanded patience, cunning, and courage that could withstand the darkest of trials. Even as her chains pressed unrelentingly against her wrists, Amara's mind sharpened, her spirit fortified by the knowledge that every risk taken, every subtle rebellion, brought her closer to the moment when the truth would finally be seen and the oppressor's fear would be laid bare. Amara had been planning the escape for weeks, each detail calculated with meticulous care. Every creak in the floor, every routine of the stepfamily, every shadow in the hallway had been memorized and plotted against. The night she chose to act, the air was thick with tension, the scent of earth and wood mixing with her own anxiety. The chains around her wrists clinked softly as she moved, a grim reminder of the physical boundaries she had endured, yet in her mind she was free. Her plan relied not only on stealth but on cunning manipulation of the environment. She had discovered a loose hinge on the window, a forgotten latch on the back door, and even a pile of straw in the courtyard that could hide her temporary path. Every step was a gamble, every breath could betray her, yet she pressed forward, heart pounding in sync with the rhythm of possibility. As she slipped through the room, narrowly avoiding detection by her stepfamily patrolling nearby, the letter, the key to her liberation, was tucked safely into her sleeve, its presence both a weight and a shield. The escape itself was a test of nerves and ingenuity. Amara moved silently across the courtyard, the moonlight casting fragmented shadows that danced like specters along the walls. She ducked behind crates, rolled across uneven stones, and avoided the creaking boards that could have exposed her presence. At one point, a dog barked in the distance, freezing her in place, muscles taut with tension. Yet every obstacle, every near discovery, reminded her of the power of patience and timing. When she finally emerged beyond the confines of the household, the cool night air filled her lungs, and for a fleeting moment she felt the exhilaration of freedom. The temporary escape was only the beginning, but it proved to her that the chains had never held her mind, never contained her spirit. She was more than her bindings. She was a force of determination, intelligence, and courage, capable of altering the fate the stepfamily had tried to impose. As whispers of Amara's courage and the hidden letter began to circulate, the village itself started to awaken from a long slumber of fear and silence. Rumors traveled like sparks across dry grass, touching ears that had long been trained to avoid scandal and danger. People who had once feared intervention began to notice subtle changes. The way the stepfamily moved with unease, the glances they cast toward Amara's room, the unusual stirrings of servants who had once acted out of submission. Minor characters, villagers previously too timid to act, now found small ways to support her, whether by leaving food or messages, or by observing and reporting movements to the right ears. The tension in the village grew, a low hum of anticipation that foreshadowed a reckoning that many had not dared imagine. Even without seeing her directly, the villagers began to sense the presence of power and truth brewing behind closed doors. The stepfamily, sensing the shifting winds, became increasingly desperate. Their control, once unquestioned, now seemed fragile, and paranoia gnawed at their every thought. They resorted to crueler tactics, issuing threats that dripped with venom and manipulating local superstitions to intimidate anyone who might support Amara. False accusations, public shaming, and even whispered curses were deployed in a bid to maintain dominance. Yet every move they made was anticipated by Amara, whose understanding of their fears and weaknesses grew sharper with each passing day. She set traps of her own, subtle maneuvers that tested their vigilance, exploited their greed, and turned their own cruelty into a tool for her strategy. Each act of desperation on their part only confirmed that the letter's revelations were poised to disrupt the fragile balance of power, a balance they had fought so hard to preserve. Amara had been planning the escape for weeks, each detail calculated with meticulous care. Every creak in the floor, every routine of the stepfamily, every shadow in the hallway had been memorized and plotted against. The night she chose to act, the air was thick with tension, the scent of earth and wood mixing with her own anxiety. The chains around her wrists clinked softly as she moved, a grim reminder of the physical boundaries she had endured, yet in her mind she was free. Her plan relied not only on stealth but on cunning manipulation of the environment. She had discovered a loose hinge on the window, a forgotten latch on the back door, and even a pile of straw in the courtyard that could hide her temporary path. Every step was a gamble, every breath could betray her, yet she pressed forward, heart pounding in sync with the rhythm of possibility. As she slipped through the room, narrowly avoiding detection by her stepfamily patrolling nearby, the letter, the key to her liberation, was tucked safely into her sleeve, its presence both a weight and a shield. The escape itself was a test of nerves and ingenuity. Amara moved silently across the courtyard, the moonlight casting fragmented shadows that danced like specters along the walls. She ducked behind crates, rolled across uneven stones, and avoided the creaking boards that could have exposed her presence. At one point, a dog barked in the distance, freezing her in place, muscles taut with tension. Yet every obstacle, every near discovery, reminded her of the power of patience and timing. When she finally emerged beyond the confines of the household, the cool night air filled her lungs, and for a fleeting moment she felt the exhilaration of freedom. The temporary escape was only the beginning, but it proved to her that the chains had never held her mind, never contained her spirit. She was more than her bindings. She was a force of determination, intelligence, and courage, capable of altering the fate the stepfamily had tried to impose. As whispers of Amara's courage and the hidden letter began to circulate, the village itself started to awaken from a long slumber of fear and silence. Rumors traveled like sparks across dry grass, touching ears that had long been trained to avoid scandal and danger. People who had once feared intervention began to notice subtle changes. The way the stepfamily moved with unease, the glances they cast toward Amara's room, the unusual stirrings of servants who had once acted out of submission. Minor characters, villagers previously too timid to act, now found small ways to support her, whether by leaving food or messages, or by observing and reporting movements to the right ears. The tension in the village grew, a low hum of anticipation that foreshadowed a reckoning that many had not dared imagine. Even without seeing her directly, the villagers began to sense the presence of power and truth brewing behind closed doors. The stepfamily, sensing the shifting winds, became increasingly desperate. Their control, once unquestioned, now seemed fragile, and paranoia gnawed at their every thought. They resorted to crueler tactics, issuing threats that dripped with venom and manipulating local superstitions to intimidate anyone who might support Amara. False accusations, public shaming, and even whispered curses were deployed in a bid to maintain dominance. Yet every move they made was anticipated by Amara, whose understanding of their fears and weaknesses grew sharper with each passing day. She set traps of her own, subtle maneuvers that tested their vigilance, exploited their greed, and turned their own cruelty into a tool for her strategy. Each act of desperation on their part only confirmed that the letter's revelations were poised to disrupt the fragile balance of power, a balance they had fought so hard to preserve. The moment the truth emerged, the Steppe family felt the walls of their carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The letter, once hidden and feared, had found its way into hands that would act with justice, and the consequences were swift and unrelenting. Villagers who had long whispered about the household's cruelty now spoke openly, their fear replaced by a newfound courage. Every word of the letter, every proof of their crimes, became a weapon aimed squarely at the oppressors. The Steppe family, once confident in their dominance, now trembled under the weight of exposure. They tried to mask their panic with stern expressions, feigned authority, and desperate attempts at intimidation, but the invisible chains of guilt and fear gripped them more tightly than any physical restraint could. The elders called a gathering in the village square, where the evidence was presented openly. Amara's letter, meticulously preserved, was read aloud, detailing every act of cruelty, deception, and theft the Steppe family had committed to suppress her identity and seize her inheritance. The villagers listened, wrapped and stunned, as the story unfolded, years of manipulation and injustice laid bare. The oppressors attempted to deny or deflect, but their lies fell apart under the clarity of truth. Each revelation was a hammer striking the fragile walls of their authority, and the community watched as their power disintegrated piece by piece. Shame, fear, and guilt etched themselves onto the Steppe family's faces, an unmistakable mirror of the suffering they had caused. Public shaming became inevitable. Neighbors who had previously avoided confrontation now confronted them openly, voicing outrage, disappointment, and judgment. Tradesmen, friends, and distant relatives spoke of their observations, corroborating Amara's account. The Steppe family could no longer hide behind wealth, status, or superstition. Every secret act was now exposed to the light of justice. Legal measures, guided by village elders, were enacted to restore the property and rights that had been stolen. Even spiritual justice played a role. Rituals of accountability and purification were conducted to cleanse the community and reinforce the moral lessons of the unfolding events. The oppressors were left powerless, their authority evaporating as Amara's intelligence and courage reshaped the narrative. Amara herself stood quietly, observing the consequences unfold. Though she had endured years of confinement, fear, and cruelty, her mind had remained sharp, her spirit unbroken. The chains that had once bound her hands now seemed almost symbolic, a physical manifestation of the oppression she had overcome. As the Steppe family faltered under scrutiny, it became clear that their greatest mistake had been underestimating her resilience. Amara's intelligence had turned the very tools of their control, the fear, the secrecy, the intimidation, against them. She had wielded patience, strategy, and moral clarity as her weapons, proving that true power lies not in domination, but in wisdom and courage. The villagers watched and learned. The story of Amara's suffering and triumph became a living lesson. Truth, once discovered and shared, cannot be chained. Every act of injustice had been countered by resilience, every attempt at suppression had been met with ingenuity. The Steppe family's humiliation served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that cruelty and deceit may control the present, but they cannot withstand vigilance, intelligence, and the courage to act. By the end of the reckoning, Amara was free in every sense. Her hands, her inheritance, and her spirit restored. Justice had been served, not only to punish wrongdoing but to inspire a community that had long been silenced. Her story became legend, a testament to the unyielding strength of those who dare to fight for truth. With the Steppe family's power dismantled and justice served, Amara stepped into a life that had long been denied to her. The chains that had bound her hands for so many years were gone, and with them vanished the weight of fear and oppression that had shadowed her every moment. Her hands, once restrained, now moved freely, crafting her destiny with purpose and confidence. Every gesture, every step, became a testament to resilience and courage, a visual declaration that the oppression she had endured could never define her. The villagers, who had watched from the sidelines for so long, now saw her not as a captive, but as a force of nature, someone whose intelligence and patience had turned the tide of fate. Amara reclaimed her inheritance, not just as property or wealth, but as a restoration of her identity, dignity, and rightful place in the village. Her family's long-lost lands, her mother's legacy, and the recognition of her true status were returned to her, marking a profound turning point in her life. Yet, it was not merely material wealth that defined her rise, it was the acknowledgement of her strength, wisdom, and unwavering moral clarity. The villagers, inspired by her courage, celebrated her not only for what she had gained, but for the lessons she had imparted. Parents told their children her story, traders spoke of her intelligence, and elders nodded with respect at the demonstration of her strategic mind. Amara had become a symbol of empowerment, the living embodiment of the idea that truth and justice could not be suppressed, no matter how tightly the chains of oppression were applied. Her daily life transformed in subtle but profound ways. She walked through the village with dignity, her free hands gesturing openly, no longer hiding or restricted. Every action reflected confidence and self-possession, and the villagers could sense that she had not only survived but had mastered the art of influence, diplomacy, and subtle authority. She mediated disputes, offered guidance to those who suffered injustice, and ensured that her rise became a source of empowerment for the entire community. Her hands, once bound, now represented agency, the ability to act decisively and justly, and the tangible manifestation of freedom. The story of Amara's triumph spread beyond the village. Travelers spoke of the woman who had outwitted her oppressors, whose patience, intellect, and bravery had dismantled a household built on fear. Her name became synonymous with courage, wisdom, and the moral authority that comes from enduring and overcoming profound injustice. Symbolically, the image of her hands, once chained, now free, captured the imagination of all who heard her tale, a universal metaphor for empowerment, truth, and justice. Her life, once confined to darkness and silence, now radiated possibility, inspiring generations to challenge oppression and honor the power of resilience. In reclaiming her life, Amara achieved more than revenge. She restored balance, dignity, and moral clarity to the village. Her rise was not just personal, it was emblematic of the enduring power of truth to overcome cruelty, of intelligence to counter tyranny, and of courage to transform suffering into empowerment. The village would never forget her, and her story would live on, a timeless testament to the triumph of the human spirit over oppression. Even after Amara had reclaimed her life, her inheritance, and her rightful place in the village, the letter remained close to her heart, a quiet relic of the trials she had endured and the justice she had inspired. Its worn folds and inked words carried a weight far greater than paper could hold. Every line, every carefully chosen phrase, echoed the truth that had once been feared and suppressed. The letter had been more than a message, it had been a beacon, a catalyst that transformed fear into courage, silence into revelation, and oppression into accountability. Amara often traced her fingers over its edges, reflecting on how these simple words had dismantled cruelty, restored balance, and reshaped an entire community. The power of the letter was not confined to its immediate impact. Generations that followed whispered of its existence, and its legend grew like a quiet wind spreading across the village and beyond. It became a symbol of the unyielding strength of truth, a reminder that no chain, no threat, no act of tyranny could silence what was inherently just. Parents read its story to their children, not as a tale of vengeance, but as a lesson in courage, intellect, and moral clarity. Elders recounted its history during gatherings, emphasizing the wisdom, patience, and perseverance that had allowed one determined individual to transform injustice into collective awakening. The letter, though silent, continued to speak louder than any voice could. Amara herself recognized the subtle influence it exerted even decades later. Travelers, wandering scribes, and villagers passing through would recount stories of a chained girl who had become a symbol of freedom. The letter had survived, not only as a physical artifact but as an enduring testament to the potency of words, the permanence of truth, and the resilience of human spirit. Its whisper was gentle yet unmistakable, warning those who sought to oppress or deceive that the consequences of cruelty could never be hidden indefinitely. Every oppressor, every tyrant who learned of the tale could feel the weight of its lesson. Injustice, no matter how carefully concealed, would ultimately meet the light. In the quiet moments at dawn, Amara would watch the sun rise over the village, feeling the gentle breeze carry whispers of the letter's legacy. Its message intertwined with the rustling leaves, the flowing river, and the songs of birds, nature itself seeming to echo its power. The symbolism was unmistakable. Freedom, justice, and courage were not fleeting ideals, but living forces that could permeate every corner of the world. Her own hands, now unbound and strong, moved with grace and purpose, mirroring the very essence of the letter's message. Every gesture was a testament to resilience, every glance a reminder that the truth had triumphed. And so, the letter remained both a relic and a living story, whispering across time and space. Its echoes reminded all who encountered it that courage and intelligence could outmatch cruelty, that patience and strategy could dismantle tyranny, and that even the smallest voice, when wielded with wisdom, could awaken a village, a community, and a world. The last whisper of the letter carried the eternal promise of liberation and justice, a poetic testament to the enduring power of words, the indomitable strength of spirit, and the courage that transforms chains into symbols of freedom.